Hey guys, it's Michael and welcome back to Behind the Song. Every time we meet, we look into the history of a song that I feel is worth telling. And today we're looking at a grunge song that became a case of life imitating art. Sign of the Crab by the Gits. So of course we have to start with some history. Singer Mia Zapata, guitarist Andy Kessler, bassist Matt Dresner, and drummer Steve Moriarty met on the campus of Liberal Arts School, and I apologize if I mispronounce this, Antnoich College in Yellow Springs, Ohio in 1976, and formed a punk band, little knowing they would have only a 5-year run. The foursome initially titled themselves after a Monty Python sketch called The Sniveling Little Rat-Faced Gits. But after thinking that would be too obscure or just too long for listeners to remember, they shortened it to just the Gits. And over the next 3 years, they played local venues in and around Yellow Springs, and even recorded and released an independent album titled Private Loves in 1988. In 1989, the Gits relocated to Seattle, Washington. The Pacific Northwest city was the hotbed for a new revolution in rock music, known as grunge to some. Because of its raw sound and punk rock energy, grunge appealed to those tired of polished 80s hair metal, and the Gits quickly gained a following, performing to growing crowds as the 90s began. Their debut album, Frenching the Bully, released in 1992, received positive reviews and led to extensive touring. By the spring of 1993, the band was negotiating a contract with Atlantic Records and working on their second album, Enter the Conquering Chicken. The final song on that album was titled Sign of the Crab, and was written and recorded more or less on a whim. Mia Zapata came into the studio one day with the idea of writing a song from the perspective of a murder victim, inspired by a wave of unsolved murders going on around Seattle the previous summer.
We were in the studio and I was there when she was writing the lyrics, and she said, "I want to write a song about a serial killer." I'm like, "Why do you want to do that?" She goes, "Because it's happening so much."
Going with this, the band had the song together before long. Recorded in the key of G, the song opens with Andy Kessler playing what can be described as a grunge shuffle. Basically a blues shuffle with a lot of distortion from the amplifier. Slowly joined by the bass and drums before Zapata launches into the first verse. Right off the bat, Zapata doesn't waste any time describing the killer's tactic of yanking her off a roller coaster and taking her to the same place every time they meet. Throughout history, several serial killers were noted to kill their victims in the same location, possibly because they never felt comfortable killing them elsewhere. And at the end of the verse, Zapata feels like something is up. The final line of, "I wonder if I'm here just to take the rap," suggests that she thinks she'll be killed as a way to keep the killer out of trouble for something. After the gritty and aggressive verse, the song then melds seamlessly into a melodic chorus. "You can talk with your husband" is a pretty enigmatic line, as it seems to suggest the killer is a woman. At least it does on first listen. Remember to take my theories with a grain of salt, by the way. The rest of the chorus, however, is of particular interest. "But there's no torch there for remorse" is a very important line, for one. Most serial killers throughout history never showed remorse for the lives they took, possibly only expressing remorse for getting caught. Assuming the killer in the song is the same, they're likely not going to be so sad about not having a torch to bear. The second half of the chorus offers a touch on reality. We ain't that much different. No, we're feeding off the same incentives. Numerous factors incentivize someone to kill. Mood, appearance, past experiences, etc. But outwardly, they're still the same as just anyone else going about their day. The reason serial killers of the past have had such long runs is because they're so normal at first glance that they draw little, if any, attention to themselves. In other words, they're the same as their victims, and that's a chilling thought. Without so much as a single beat lost, Sign of the Crab then switches from the melodic chorus to its raw sound for the second verse. By now, Zapata seems to be onto what the killer has in mind for their meeting tonight.
Never cease to amaze me, that things you'll try to pull. Anything to get me in and then get me killed. Go ahead and slice me up, spread me all across this town. 'Cause you know you're the one that won't be found. Maybe I've broke my luck one too many times. Now taking it upon yourself to put me back in line. We'll leave it to fear to get the message through. But isn't that the romance that brought me here to you?
By saying she's not amazed by everything the killer has tried to lure her into the trap, she sarcastically dares them to kill her, seeing how cocky they are, so much so that they're determined they won't even be caught. At the same time, however, Zapata is very self-aware of her own behavior. She's met with this person so many times before that she feels her luck has finally run out, and this will be her last meeting with them. She even theorizes that killing her will be the killer's way to eliminate her for evading what seems to be so many past unsuccessful attempts. Remember, Zapata was inspired by a string of murders in Seattle leading up to when she wrote the song. Based on that, she's imagining that the killer has finally caught up to her, and it seems and seems to have a motive if the last line of verse 2 is to be believed. By asking, "But isn't that the romance that brought me here to you?" Zapata suggests maybe the killer is someone close to her, like a former lover with whom she had a relationship that soured. A murder caused by that is actually known as a passion provocation killing. The short version is, two people are romantically involved for enough times for one to become obsessed with the other. The other person notices that, becomes uncomfortable with their partner's obsessive actions, and breaks off the relationship. And finally, the obsessed individual, feeling betrayed and unable to accept the breakup, flies off the handle and kills their now former partner in a passion-fueled moment. Could this be the motive for the killer in the song? Maybe, then again maybe not. Let's remember Zapata was inspired by a string of murders where none of the victims had any connections to the other. Besides, they were killed by the same assailant, presumably. So the killer's true motive in the song remains open for self-interpretation. After the second verse and chorus, Sign of the Crab enters a brief instrumental break before entering the third verse. The third verse starts the same as the first, before Zapata changes the lyrics for the second half. By this point in the song, Zapata thinks she's seen the killer's intentions and believes she can outsmart them and get away. She carries this notion into the last chorus as well. While the first two ended with mention of the same incentives, the final chorus ends with this line. By ending the song on that note, Zapata makes her statement crystal clear. She believes she's at an advantage over the killer and will be safe even after this encounter. The band then plays one last run of the main riff before the song and the album, Enter the Conquering Chicken, both end abruptly. With the final song recorded, the Gits began the mixing and mastering process for the album before departing for a tour of the East Coast of the US. They planned to release the album later in 1993, but as fate would have it, one member of the band wouldn't live to see its release. On the night of July 6, 1993, Mia Zapata visited the famous Comet Tavern in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, a popular hangout for musicians. After spending a few hours there, she left on foot around 2 a.m. to visit a friend in her apartment building a block away, before leaving to walk to another friend's apartment a few more blocks away. Then at 3:20 a.m., a passerby stumbled upon a woman's lifeless body laying in the street at the intersection of 24th Avenue South and South Washington Street. Police and paramedics were called, but the victim was pronounced dead at the scene, having been beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled. No ID was found on the victim, but the medical examiner, who was a fan of the Gits and had attended several of their concerts, recognized her as Mia Zapata. That's right, the snarling, animated frontwoman of one of Seattle's biggest up-and-coming bands was dead at the age of 27, inexplicably assaulted and then murdered in cold blood. News of Zapata's death sent the Seattle music scene reeling, with family, friends, and wondering who could have been behind this violent attack. Without their singer, the Gits' surviving members decided to put work on Enter the Conquering Chicken on the back burner, ultimately releasing the album almost a year later in March of 1994. Hearing the album, and especially hearing Sign of the Crab, fans began drawing parallels between the song and Mia Zapata's real-life murder. This line in the second verse would prove especially chilling.
Go ahead and slice me up, spread me all across this town.
Remember, Zapata spoke from the perspective of a murder victim, only to be killed shortly after the song was recorded in real life. In fact, about the only difference between the song and real life is this line. Slash me up, spread me all across this town suggests a stabbing homicide, while Zapata was beaten and then strangled to death. Another chilling coincidence is the time of year Zapata was killed. Zapata was officially killed on July 7, 1993. The astrological house of Cancer occurs annually from June 22nd to July 23rd. And the sign for Cancer? The Crab. That's right, Mia Zapata was murdered during the Sign of the Crab, referencing the name of presumably the last song she ever wrote and recorded. Even this line in the second verse would prove prophetic.
'Cause you know you're the one that won't be found.
As the years wore on, the identity of Zapata's killer remained a mystery. That's not to say authorities and investigators weren't trying their damnedest, though. They pursued several leads that only petered out as soon as they emerged. Even the surviving Gits hired private investigator Lee Herron to conduct her own investigation with no luck.
There were no eyewitnesses, and believe me, I tried. I went out a couple of nights with another investigator and talked with every prostitute on the street to see if anybody knew anything. I talked with all the neighbors in the area. People saw a car drive away, but they didn't see anybody in it.
But while Zapata's murder case remained shelved, it wouldn't go unsolved forever. We know Mia was killed in 1993, of course. That same year, biochemist Kary Mullis won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for a breakthrough in DNA identification, the polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, test. This was a watershed in science and criminal justice, as PCR allowed positive identification on very small DNA samples. During Mia's autopsy, what appeared to be a human bite mark was found on her left breast. The same medical examiner who recognized Zapata swabbed the mark and attempted to determine if the assailant left saliva and thus his DNA on the body. DNA was found, but the sample was too small for DNA testing of 1993, so it was placed into a freezer for storage, with the medical examiner hoping the sample could one day identify the killer. That day came 8 years later in 2001, when the PCR test was refined enough to test the sample from Zapata's autopsy. The test generated the result of a male DNA profile, so now it just had to be matched with someone. The profile was put into the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, and when no match was identified at first, the system was left to run 24/7. And a year later, in 2002, the system matched the DNA to Jesus Mezquia, a 48-year-old Cuban exile and fisherman with a history of violent crime. Mezquia was living in Marathon, Florida in 2002, but investigators determined he had lived in Seattle in 1993, only 3 blocks away from where Mia Zapata's body was found. Mezquia was arrested and charged with the murder of Mia Zapata in 2003, and despite his protestations of innocence, the evidence, and especially the DNA match, proved too strong. Jesus Mezquia was convicted of the murder in March 2004 and sentenced to 36 years in prison, the maximum sentence under Washington state law. He appealed his conviction a year later in 2005, but after waiving his right to have a jury decide his fate, Mezquia was sent back to prison. He died in 2021 at the age of 66. Mia Zapata's family, friends, and fans no doubt found closure after Mezquia's conviction, even though the conviction wouldn't bring her back. Zapata's death affected so many others. The Gits, for one, split up later in 1993, leaving Enter the Conquering Chicken as their final album, though the surviving members later went on to pursue other music projects. Several Gits fans were left without a band to look forward to seeing, and the Zapata family was left without a daughter. No parent should have to bury their child. To end on a positive note, however, several of Mia's friends set up a non-profit self-defense group called Home Alive, which teaches self-defense training and has overseen several benefit concerts towards several anti-violence causes. Even 32 years after its inception, Home Alive is still going strong and boasts several famous contributors, including members of fellow grunge bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Bikini Kill frontwoman Kathleen Hanna, and the legend herself, Joan Jett. So Mia Zapata must be smiling down on those she left behind, blessing them with their efforts to prevent another murder like hers. And while Mia's death was too soon and sudden, her spirit still lives on through the music she created with the Gits. So I hope you guys liked the video, or at least found it entertaining. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you never miss the next Behind the Song or my next video. And until then, rock on. See you next time. Come on, camera, focus. Focus, focus. And today we're looking at a grunge song. Come on, just focus on me. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to mispronounce this, Antoinich Tech. Oh dear. See? Anoch Tech. Antoinich College. And even recorded and released an independent album. Throughout history, several serial killers were noted to kill their victims. The song then sieges seamlessly from the that's a tongue twister, and possibly only slash me up, spread me all across this town seems to suggest us. Remember, Zapata was instructed by a string of murders in and around. That day came 8 years later, and Mezquia was living in Amazon, Florida. Nice. Though funny enough, with that humidity, Florida can feel like the Amazon. Anyway.